The invasion of Earth had begun with absolute confidence. Supreme Commander Xyphor of the Vornax Dominion had overseen the conquest of over 100 worlds, each one folding under the sheer might of the Dominion's war machine. Resistance was expected, of course. Some species fought for a time, a few even waged prolonged conflicts, but in the end, all civilizations broke. Superior firepower, superior strategy, and superior discipline always triumphed. And so, when the order came from the High Dominion Council to subjugate the human homeworld, Xyphor had barely given it a second thought. Earth's defenses were primitive by galactic standards. Their nuclear weapons were nothing more than blunt instruments of destruction, ineffective against Dominion shielding. Their orbital presence was laughable. Rudimentary satellites, a handful of space stations incapable of even mounting proper defenses. When the fleet arrived in the Sol system, Xyphor had no doubt the war would be over in mere days, a week at most. He had landed his troops in key population centers, assuming that a few precision strikes against their leadership and military would force an unconditional surrender. But the humans did not surrender. At first, their resistance seemed futile. Like all others, their aircraft launched desperate attacks, only to be incinerated mid-air by the Dominion's automated defense grids. Their ground forces fired ineffective ballistic weapons, barely scratching the armor of Vornax shock troopers. Their armored vehicles were primitive and sluggish, incapable of competing with the Dominion's hover tanks and aerial bombardments. The first day proceeded as expected. Earth's cities burned and its military crumbled under the initial assault. Then something changed. The humans did not fight like any species Xyphor had encountered before. They did not flee in terror, nor did they surrender when defeat was imminent. Instead, they adapted, fast. Within hours, their forces had abandoned traditional battle formations, switching to unpredictable, decentralized warfare. Civilians joined the fight, arming themselves with whatever they could find. They transformed their cities into fortresses, creating ambush points, sniper nests, and death traps. Every street, every building, every alleyway became a battleground. Xyphor's troops began reporting disturbing engagements. Squads of elite Dominion warriors were being eliminated by lone human snipers, crude projectile rifles but wielded with unnerving precision. Some units found themselves trapped in buildings that had been rigged with explosives, detonated the moment they stepped inside. In other cases, Dominion forces took control of an area, only to be ambushed by human forces emerging from underground tunnels and sewer systems. Casualties started to mount. It was the first time in centuries that a Dominion invasion force was suffering significant losses against a pre-FTL civilization. The commander's advisors assured him that it was only a matter of time before the humans exhausted their resources, before their resistance collapsed under the overwhelm. He studied the battle data, and what he saw disturbed him. The humans were learning. Every time the Dominion adapted to their tactics, the humans shifted again. They were unpredictable, erratic, and seemingly immune to fear. They did not break when their armies were defeated. They simply changed the rules of war. Dominion forces had fought wars of attrition before, but never against an enemy so unrelenting. The more they pushed the humans, the more vicious and inventive their counterattacks became. It wasn't just their tactics, it was their psychology. The Vornax, like most species, feared death. Even the most hardened warriors would hesitate when faced with certain annihilation. But the humans? They did not hesitate. They embraced death as a weapon. Reports came in of human soldiers, mortally wounded, detonating explosives to take out entire Dominion squads with them. Others charged directly into enemy fire, sacrificing themselves to destroy key assets. A Dominion outpost was overrun when human forces launched a suicide attack, overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers and desperation. A captured human operative, despite being interrogated with the most advanced techniques available, refused to break. Instead, he laughed and whispered, "You're the ones who should be afraid." By the third day, the war had spiraled out of control. Dominion forces had expected resistance, but not this. Not a species that turned everything into a weapon. Dominion commanders reported entire battalions falling to improvised explosives, poisoned water supplies, and biological contaminants. Dominion medical teams were overwhelmed, not by human weapons, but by disease. The Vornax had conquered countless worlds, but never had they encountered a species that carried such a vast array of microbial horrors within their own bodies. Dominion soldiers stationed in human-occupied areas began to fall ill. Infections spread rapidly. Minor cuts became lethal wounds as human bacteria attacked immune systems that had never encountered them before. Even the air was a threat. Dominion troops who removed their helmets for even a moment found themselves crippled by allergies, respiratory failure, or worse. Xyphor realized with growing horror that Earth itself was a biological death trap. Even worse, the humans had discovered their weakness. They began deliberately exposing captured soldiers to infected wounds, using their own bodies as biological weapons. Some Dominion commanders dismissed it as desperation, but Xyphor saw the truth. This was not desperation, this was strategy. Then came the final blow. Somehow, the humans had managed to infiltrate Dominion facilities. Whether through hacking, espionage, or sheer audacity, they had seized control of Dominion nuclear stockpiles. Not human nukes, Dominion warheads, far more destructive than anything Earth had possessed before. And they used them. Coordinated strikes obliterated key Dominion strongholds, annihilating entire battalions in nuclear fire. Ships in low orbit were crippled by electromagnetic pulses, rendering their systems useless. The fleet's supply lines were cut, their command structures thrown into chaos. Xyphor stood in stunned silence aboard his flagship, watching as explosions rippled across the planet below. This was not the outcome he had foreseen. This was not the war he had prepared for. He turned to his war council, all of them silent, their expressions betraying the same realization. They had made a grave mistake. Humans were not prey, they were not weak, they were not conquerable. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because they refused to lose. And for the first time in his long and decorated career, Supreme Commander Xyphor felt something he had never felt before. Fear. With a heavy heart, he issued the order he had never expected to give.
Dominion forces, retreat.
The bridge of the tyrant's wrath was silent. Supreme Commander Xyphor stood motionless, staring at the data streaming across the war table. Reports of troop losses, communications blackouts, entire battalions missing in action, and then the worst of them all, confirmed nuclear detonations. Not human bombs. Vornax warheads stolen and repurposed by Earth's resistance. He had witnessed planetary annihilation before. The Dominion had reduced worlds to ash when necessary, but never like this. Never with their own weapons turned against them. Never with the sheer, unrelenting brutality that the humans displayed now. The invasion was failing. Xyphor's war council stood around him, their expressions unreadable but their body language betraying uncertainty. These were battle-hardened officers, veterans of countless conquests, and yet, for the first time, they hesitated. The commander's second-in-command, high strategist Volric, exhaled through his mandibles, his clawed hands tightening into fists. This is impossible. His voice, normally cold and calculated, carried a tremor. No species fights like this. Xyphor's inner eyelids flickered as he turned his gaze toward Volric. No species we have faced fights like this. The War Council remained silent. No one could refute it. Xyphor exhaled, refocusing on the live battlefield feeds. Cities burned. Not just from Dominion bombardments, but from human scorched earth tactics. They destroyed their own infrastructure, denying the Dominion valuable resources. They rigged their power plants to explode, took down their own satellites to prevent orbital tracking, and flooded their underground networks when they suspected Vornax infiltration. No species had ever done this. Even the fiercest warriors the Dominion had conquered always preserved something, holding out hope that they could one day rebuild. The humans did not. They were not trying to survive the war. They were trying to win it, no matter the cost. The communications officer turned from his station. Supreme Commander, incoming transmission from Field Marshal Gorveth on the ground. Xyphor gestured for the holodemer. A moment later, the battle-scarred face of Gorveth, commander of ground forces, materialized. The marshal's breathing was heavy, his armor visibly damaged, and smoke filled the background of his transmission. Supreme Commander, Gorveth said, his mandibles twitching, I must formally request immediate reinforcement. Our forces are being overrun. The humans they are unlike anything we have encountered before. Xyphor remained impassive. You command over 2 million soldiers across this planet. How can mere primitives be overwhelming you? Gorveth hesitated. It was subtle, but Xyphor saw it. The hesitation of a warrior who had never known fear, now confronted with something he could not comprehend. Supreme Commander, these humans. Gorveth's voice was uncharacteristically low. They do not fight for survival. They fight for the kill. We have taken thousands of them down, but for every one that falls, 3 more emerge from the ruins. They hide in the dark, strike without warning. They use our own weapons against us, hack our systems, infiltrate our bases. We captured a group of them yesterday. They refused to speak, even under full neural pain induction. He paused. One of them bit off his own tongue to avoid interrogation. Another used a hidden blade to kill himself before we could extract information. I have never seen such madness. Madness. Xyphor had studied many species. In every war, he had observed how different civilizations reacted to conquest. There was defiance, yes, there was resistance, but ultimately there was self-preservation. Even the proudest warriors would surrender when death was the only alternative. But humans, they are not mad, Xyphor said slowly. They are something far worse. Gorveth stiffened. Supreme Commander, are you suggesting that we withdraw? The War Council froze. Volric turned sharply. Impossible. A withdrawal would be a humiliation. The Dominion does not retreat from primitives. Xyphor turned his gaze toward the strategist. Do not mistake them for primitives. Volric hesitated, but before he could speak, another officer stepped forward. Admiral Xyphor, Commander of Orbital Fleet Operations. Commander, Xyphor said cautiously, I must inform you that our low-orbit defenses have been compromised. The humans have managed to board 3 of our warships. Silence. Xyphor turned to face him fully. That is impossible. Their technology. They are not using their technology, Xyphor interrupted. They are using ours. They have salvaged Dominion exosuits from fallen warriors and are using them to infiltrate our own ranks. His mandibles clicked in frustration. We are receiving reports of friendly fire because our soldiers cannot distinguish between human operatives and real Dominion forces. This was beyond anything Xyphor had prepared for. No species should be able to adapt this fast. Even the most advanced civilizations took years to reverse engineer Dominion technology. These humans were doing it in days. Gorveth exhaled heavily. Supreme Commander, if we do not reinforce our ground forces, we will lose the entire invasion front. Xyphor clenched his jaw. He was not a coward. He was not weak. He had led the Dominion to countless victories, had crushed empires and shattered fleets. But deep inside, a cold, creeping realization had taken hold. They were not fighting an enemy that could be defeated conventionally. They were not fighting an enemy that would surrender. They were fighting extinction itself. The Dominion was a galactic superpower, but humans were something else entirely. A species that did not fear death. A species that adapted to every new threat faster than any intelligent race had a right to. A species that weaponized everything, even their own destruction. A species that would rather burn their own world than let an enemy take it. The Dominion had made a mistake, a colossal, fatal mistake. They should have never come here. Xyphor turned to the communications officer. Order a full planetary withdrawal. All ground forces are to evacuate immediately. The War Council erupted in protests. Supreme Commander, Volric began, but Xyphor's voice cut through the noise. This is not a war, he said, his tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty. This is a survival test, and we are failing. The war room fell silent. Admiral Xyphor spoke carefully. If we retreat now, Supreme Commander, it will be the first time in Dominion history that we have fled from a lesser species. Xyphor's gaze was cold as the void. We are not lesser. A moment passed, then another, and then he gave the final order. All forces fall back. The withdrawal was chaotic. Human forces did not relent even as Dominion ships began emergency extractions. They hunted retreating troops with a hunger unlike anything witnessed before. Ambushes continued. Suicide attacks increased. Some Dominion vessels never made it off the surface, their evacuation points overrun before liftoff. Even in retreat, they suffered losses that should have been impossible. Xyphor stood on the bridge as the tyrant's wrath accelerated away from Earth, its engines pushing the dreadnought to maximum velocity. He watched through the viewing screens as the blue planet shrunk in the distance. And he knew in the depths of his being that this war was not over. The Dominion had been beaten, but the humans had only just begun. The tyrant's wrath drifted in the silence of space, its massive frame scarred from the battle over Earth. Inside the war room, Supreme Commander Xyphor stood before the Dominion High Council, his holographic form projected into the grand chamber of the Primacy Citadel, the heart of the Dominion. Seated in their towering, gold-adorned thrones, the 5 overlords regarded him with cold, unblinking eyes. The chamber was vast, illuminated by dim crimson light, the color of conquest, and yet, for the first time in recorded history, conquest had failed. The humans had driven them from their world. It was not a tactical withdrawal, it was not a strategic retreat, it was a defeat. A shameful, catastrophic defeat. The overlords had ruled for centuries. They had never known loss, and now the greatest military commander in Dominion history stood before them, defeated not by a mighty empire or an advanced species, but by pre-FTL primitives. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Finally, Overlord Xyphor, the eldest of the ruling council, leaned forward, his mandibles clicking softly. "Explain yourself, Supreme Commander," he said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "How did an empire that has conquered over 100 worlds flee from a single primitive planet?" Xyphor remained composed, but his inner eyelids flickered, a subtle sign of discomfort. "Overlords, the humans are not what we believed them to be. They are unlike any species we have encountered before." Another overlord, Vernaxcall, let out a derisive chitter. "They are a pre-FTL civilization. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their biology is weak. Their world should have fallen in days." His glowing eyes narrowed. "And yet you tell us they were too dangerous to fight." Xyphor's claws curled against his palms, but his voice remained steady. "Their technology is irrelevant, their biology is irrelevant. It is their mentality that makes them dangerous." He took a slow breath before continuing. "They fight with no regard for self-preservation. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves, their ability to adapt to every new threat, their capacity to turn even their own destruction into a weapon, it is unlike anything we have faced. They are not conquerable. We thought they would surrender once we demonstrated superior force. They did not. We thought they would retreat when overwhelmed. They did not. We thought they would break under the weight of war." He paused. "They did not break. We did." The words echoed in the chamber. The overlords were silent. Their eye stalks twitched ever so slightly, an unconscious display of discomfort. Dominion doctrine was clear. Conquest was inevitable. Resistance was futile. And yet, Earth had resisted. Finally, Overlord Cyrax, the most warlike of the Council, hissed, "You claim these humans are different, but we have crushed countless warrior species before. What makes them so unique?" Xyphor's eyes darkened. "They do not fight like warriors. Warriors have limits. Humans do not." He pressed a control on his console. The chamber darkened, and a series of battle recordings played before the overlords. The first recording, a Dominion outpost overrun. Human operatives clad in salvaged Vornax armor, infiltrating their ranks and turning their own weapons against them. They had learned how to mimic the Dominion within days. The second recording, a human soldier mortally wounded, laughing as he detonated his own body, taking an entire Dominion squad with him. His last words translated, "See you in hell, freaks." The third recording, a group of humans cornered in a ruined building, no escape, no hope of survival. Instead of surrendering, they rushed their attackers, armed with nothing but knives and makeshift explosives. They died fighting, every single one of them. The fourth recording, human resistance forces successfully hacking Dominion communication systems. They did not just intercept transmissions, they altered them, feeding false information, luring Dominion forces into ambushes they never saw coming. The final recording, a captured human soldier strapped to an interrogation device. The Dominion had interrogated countless prisoners before. The device always worked, always. But this human? He did not scream, he did not beg. He looked straight into the eyes of his captors and smiled. "You think this is pain?" he whispered. "You have no idea what pain is." Then he bit down on something hidden in his mouth. A toxin capsule. Self-inflicted death, just to deny them information. The chamber remained silent long after the recordings ended. Overlord Xyphor's voice was quiet but sharp. "You fear them." Xyphor's mandibles twitched. "I respect them," he corrected. "And I fear what will happen if we try to fight them again." He straightened. "The Dominion has thrived for centuries because we fight wars that we know we can win. This is not a war we can win." Overlord Cyrax's eyes flared. "You expect us to accept defeat?" "Yes," Xyphor said simply. "Because if we return to Earth, it will not be their planet that burns. It will be ours." The Overlord stiffened at the words. Xyphor continued, "Humans are not like other species. Most civilizations seek peace after war. Most civilizations accept conquest when they are outmatched. But humans?" he exhaled. "They will never stop fighting. If we push them, they will push back harder. If we take their world, they will burn ours to the ground. And if we make them our enemies—" He paused, looking each overlord in the eye. "Then we will have made the greatest mistake in Dominion history." The overlords exchanged glances. For the first time, they looked uncertain. Overlord Xyphor studied him carefully. "Then tell us, Supreme Commander, what do you suggest we do?" Xyphor was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath. "We leave Earth alone." A ripple of disbelief passed through the chamber. "Unacceptable," Overlord Cyrax snarled. "To leave a world defiant?" "They are not just a world," Xyphor interrupted, his voice firm. "They are a warning. If we are wise, we will heed it." Silence. Then Overlord Vornax let out a slow, measured breath. "And if they come for us?" Xyphor's gaze darkened. "They will," he said. "One day." He turned off the hologram recordings, plunging the chamber into dim red light once more. "The humans do not know what we are. They do not know what lies beyond their star system. They do not know the true scale of the galaxy." He straightened. "But one day they will. And when that day comes, we must pray that they remember mercy." The overlords were silent. because they all knew the truth. Humans did not start this war, but when they returned to the stars, when they found out what had been done to them, they would finish it.